Welcome to Fake Chats, everybody. I'm your host, Andrew Burnett, and today I have a very special guest with me, Michael Ray Lewis, the director of Universe Designed, which is a new movie coming out to you, and we're going to be talking more about that. But, Michael, welcome to the program first off.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
You described yourself as a former atheist whose personal search for meaning led you to faith. Can you walk us through what that pivotal moment or evidence that finally shattered your atheism and convinced you that the universe is designed?
Sure. So I grew up in a home where I think most of my family would say they believed in God, but they never talked about God. We never talked about Jesus, definitely never read the Bible. And so growing up, I just adopted atheism. It to me seemed more logical that there just wasn't any God. And then on top of that, no Christians were able to answer the difficult questions that I had. And so as I got older, I kind of became more of an aggressive atheist and ended up meeting my wife. A little while later, we got married. And so she did grow up in the church, but she was pulled away when she was younger. And of course, I pulled her away as well. But she comes home to me one day and she says, I feel like Jesus is calling me back. And I remember when she said that, I'm like, oh no, now I got to start dealing with all this again. And I was like, you know what? I'll go to church with you and I'll see what all this is about. And so I remember we walked into a church and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, yeah, I get it. It gives people something to hope in. I just don't think it's actually true. And so I figured all I had to do was to stop going to this church was just to show her that it wasn't real. And so I ended up hitting her with difficult questions that she wasn't able to answer. But no matter what, she was adamant that it was true. And I remember there was one particular moment in my journey where a video popped up on my YouTube feed. And it was a video by an astrophysicist by the name of Dr. Hugh Ross. And in the video, he described how the book of Genesis actually lines up with what we're finding in science, that it's not contradictory, that it actually complement each other. And I remember that was the first time that it kind of piqued my curiosity. And I said, you know what? Maybe I should take a second look at this. And that started a 3 year journey of me just diving into the evidence and really finding out there are good reasons to think that this is actually true. And I had looked at other worldviews, I had looked at other religions, and this was better explaining everything that we see. Now, it still took 3 years to convince me, but it was the evidence that showed me that I needed to take a second look at this and take it seriously. And it was the evidence that convinced me that what Christians claim and what the scriptures claim and what Jesus claims about himself is actually true. So I remember one day I threw my hands up and I said, all right, Jesus, what's next? Gave my life to Christ. And since then, I have been on a mission to help others find the evidence that convinced me that it was true.
So, what was the very first piece of evidence, whether it's scientific, philosophical, or experiential, that made you think, wait, maybe the atheists have this wrong?
I think one of the most compelling evidences that really started to pique my curiosity was the evidence for fine tuning. The fact that there are constants and parameters and characteristics about our universe that have to be exactly right in order for not only intelligent life to exist, but life in general to exist at all. And it turns out everything down to the size of our universe, the location of our planet within our solar system, the type of star we have, the particular moment we are in the history of the universe, all of these parameters narrow down that the odds of this happening is virtually impossible. And yet here we are. And not only here we are, but here we are able to ask the questions, why am I here? What is my purpose? We can intelligently look into the universe and ask and ponder and question our reality. But I think the fine tuning, just seeing the odds of all of this happening by chance to be virtually impossible, I think that was overwhelming. And that was probably one of the first real evidences that piqued my curiosity and started where I started to really lean in and take a deeper look at all of this.
So, this is your directorial debut on this scale. What terrified you the most about taking on a project that tackles the biggest question of all? Does God exist?
Well, prior to this, I mean, I had been in the film industry already for a while, but I was mostly the DP, which is the guy behind the camera, or the editor for projects. And most of the projects I worked on were horror films because that's what I was obsessed with as an atheist. And so when I gave my life to Christ, it started to really lay on my heart that, I need to do something for the kingdom. I need to figure out a way to take what I do and do it for the kingdom, to do it for Jesus. And I couldn't think of a way to do it. I was in my head, I was like, well, I don't like Christian films. I don't like I don't like any of the ones that come out. And so my wife looked at me and she said, well, why don't you do a documentary based on the evidence that convinced you it was true? And I said, that's it. I said, that's what I need to do. And so I literally just sent out tons of emails to all of the scholars of people that I had read books on, not expecting any of them to respond. And virtually every single one of them started responding in the emails and saying, yeah, we're willing to do an interview. We won't charge you for it. Just come out here and do the interview. We'll give you a couple hours. And so I started buying plane tickets and just flying out there. And I honestly, I don't think I was nervous about it because I was more excited than anything. And I think I didn't even really have a clear picture in what was going to happen. All I knew is that I had an opportunity and I was going to take it. And so I got plane tickets, flew out there, and just started asking all the difficult questions that I had as an atheist. And what came out of it was something amazing. I ended up with 36 hours of content that I had to condense down to an hour and 20-minute film and have it tell a story. And that's what I hope that I've done.
So you said your heart is for universe design to be an evangelistic tool for both skeptics and believers. When you picture one atheist watching this film alone in their living room, what is the one thought or reaction you're praying they have by the end?
I would hope that this film can do what Greg Kogle says, which is to plant a stone in their shoe, put a pebble in their shoe, get them thinking, leaving them something that annoys them, but annoys them in a good way, something that they can't quite let go of, that helps them to realize they need to take a second look at this. You can't judge Christianity based on the abuse that you've maybe seen or experienced by other Christians. And you can't judge Christianity based on the face value slogans that you hear, like if there is a good God, he wouldn't allow evil and suffering in the world, or evolution has disproven Christianity. If those claims are true, then you need to investigate those claims and spend more than just a Google search really looking into this topic. Because I'm convinced that if you can take a deeper look, then you'll see that Christianity really is the best explanation. And so my hope would be that it would stick with people, that it would get people thinking, that it would get them to slow down from the busyness of life, to take a second look at the big questions of life, like why are you here? Why is there something rather than nothing? What is your purpose here? What does all this mean? Is there Are there answers out there? And if there are, what are they? And so that's what my hope would be.
So there are already many films on apologetics and intelligent design. What did you set out to do differently with universe design that hasn't been done before?
I've only seen a few really apologetic based films. And a couple of them that I had seen, one of the things that I noticed is as I was watching them, I couldn't help but get the feeling that I was being yelled at or being told what to believe. And I knew that as my atheist self, I would have shut some of those films off instantly and I wouldn't have taken a second look at them. And so one of the approaches that I wanted to do is I wanted to approach it in a softer way. I wanted to approach it in a way that me as an atheist, remembering back, what would have kept my interest? What would have kept me interested and had me to watch through the whole thing and really take a look at the evidence? And so one of the things that I've done is I've structured the film in such a way that if you just start it and you don't realize you're watching a Christian film, you probably won't realize you are until you're about 20 minutes into it. Because I really just try to lay out the evidence and let the audience come to their conclusion on their own. I don't try to tell them what to come to the conclusion on. I just say, look, here's the evidence. It is overwhelming. It really does best explain all of this. So what are you going to do from here? And so that's kind of my goal is for it to be a softer approach. And not only that, I really wanted the film to stand out visually. because there's lots of Christian films I've seen that they have a good message, but the images and the way they portray that message are just not very compelling or not very visually appealing and will not appeal to non-believers. And that's what my hope is, that this film will be structured in such a way that it really does pique people's curiosity.
So, if you had to boil the entire 90 plus minutes down to one single sentence that you would want burned into the viewer's mind when the credits roll, what is that sentence?
Let me think about that for a minute. One single sentence. I would probably say the universe points to an intelligent creator based on the evidence that we can see. That intelligent creator has revealed himself in our reality, and that intelligent creator is Jesus.
So, you've assembled an absolute all star lineup: Stephen Meyer, Hugh Ross, Frank Turek, Sean McDowell, Jay Warner Wallace, Alyssa Childers, and so many more. Which interview surprised you the most?
I would say reasons to believe with Dr. Hugh Ross. I think Dr. Hugh Ross was a pivotal person in my journey. He was the one that first YouTube video popped up and really piqued my curiosity. And so when I had the opportunity to interview him, it was such an amazing experience to be able to sit with him and talk with him about all of these big questions. But on top of that, it was just an amazing experience going to the Reasons to Believe, their main office, and they were extremely welcoming. And they have such a great resource for non-believers, for believers. They're within the scientific community, and they put out weekly new evidences that we're finding in science that point to an intelligent creator. And I think that was just an amazing experience to be able to interview him.
Was there one interview that really just stuck out to you that you were really excited about being a part of the documentary?
Oh, all of them. I honestly, I never would have thought that I would have gotten any of these guys in the film. And so the fact that they agreed to it, every single one of them was amazing. I mean, I probably couldn't point to one, but Dr. Stephen Meyer, Hugh Ross, Frank Turek, Mike Lacona, all of these guys, they have such great resources and ministries that to be able to interview them, I couldn't pick just one. I think it was an amazing experience for every single interview.
So, were there any arguments or pieces of evidence that ended up on the cutting room floor that were painful to leave out?
There were dozens. Like I said, I had 36 hours of content that I was not able to include because, well, for one, I had to keep the film short because of budget concerns. I didn't have the money to make a 2 hour movie. I had to cut it back to an hour and 25-minute movie. And on top of that, even within the arguments that I cover, I still don't cover them as deep as I probably could cover them because each one of these arguments has so much information that you can research and study. But there were dozens of arguments I wasn't able to include. The moral argument wasn't in there. There were so many that I felt would have been very compelling, but I tried to pick the main ones that were persuasive to me when I was coming from atheism, when I was really taking a second look at this. And so that's what I hope I've done. I hope I've selected the ones that were most compelling to me and hopefully will be compelling to others.
So, as a filmmaker, how did you visually translate concepts like fine tuning of the universe, the resurrection evidence, or the moral arguments so that they don't feel like they're sitting in a lecture hall, but actually feel cinematic and awe inspiring?
So with social media, one of the very difficult things is you have to keep people's interest because we're so used to these fast-paced reels or video reels that you can just scroll and kind of keep going through. And so I thought to myself when I was putting the film together, I was like, you know what? I need to keep people interested. Well, how am I going to keep them interested on topics that are so completely deep? Well, one way I decided to do it was I was going to cut to something new visually every 6 seconds. So every 6 seconds, you're going to get a new visual something to look at. And it's not going to be just someone sitting there talking. We're going to cut to a shot from nature. We're going to cut to a visual effects image that helps describe what we're trying to get across. When we start talking about the detail and design that you see within the cell, I use a visual effect. I bring that cell in so that you can really see what it looks like. And I think keeping people interested visually is just constantly changing it to something new, but telling a story with the visuals in such a way that it's consistent with what you're describing. It's consistent with the line, the way that the story's going. Another direction I attempted to do was to show the scholars behind the scenes, doing things behind the scenes instead of just sitting in a chair talking. I would show them at their homes or at their work, doing these things so that you could kind of really be in the room with them while you're listening to them, and help them to narrate through this story that we tell without a narrator, with just the scholars. Allow them to speak through the entire thing and let you come to the conclusion at the end. And I hope I was able to do that with the visuals to keep people interested.
So, one of the most debated topics today is whether the universe's fine tuning could just be the result of a multiverse. Several of your experts tackle that head on. What do you think is the single strongest rebuttal to the multiverse rescue device for atheism?
Hmm. I address it in the film, but it really comes down to a few things. One, if the multiverse exists, it exists outside of our universe, therefore we can't measure it. And if we can't measure it, we do not have any evidence that it's there. It's not testable. It's not something we can try to measure. And so, one, we don't have any evidence for it. Two, it explains too much because if there is an unlimited number of universes with an unlimited number of possibilities, then you can literally explain away everything. That means you would have a universe somewhere where God does exist and Christianity is true, and therefore he would exist in all the universes. You would have a universe somewhere where things were just slightly different, and a tree fell over and just happened to fall on some ink and write the entire encyclopedia, right? I mean, you could explain away literally everything. And like Hugh Ross says in the film, that a theory that explains everything explains nothing. And a third rebuttal to it would be that even if there is a universe based on the people who affirm that there are multiverse, and based on the people who affirm the multiverse, is that multiverse would also need to be finely tuned and would also need a beginning. And so you don't get past the need for an ultimate creator.
So, you have both old Earth voices like Hugh Ross and young Earth voices in the film. How did you navigate that potential tension, and do you personally lean one way or the other on the edge of the universe?
You know, when I really started looking into all this, because Hugh Ross was a huge influence, I jumped. I the old Earth perspective is what piqued my curiosity. Every time I heard the word the young Earth perspective, I would shove it away and say this is nonsense. And that was the first time that it really kind of took down a barrier for me that the what we're finding in science, and the age of the universe that we're measuring the universe to be is not incompatible with the pages of Scripture. It's merely upon a different interpretation. And so I heavily leaned into the old Earth perspective through that entire journey. But I realized, and I didn't know it at the time, but I became aware of the fact that there is this huge tension between young Earth and old Earth perspectives. That the interpretation that you have these Christians who are debating on this topic as if it has something to do with salvation, right? As if it's an essential that you have to believe that the universe is young. And on in the film, I bypass it altogether. I thought originally I was going to include the topic, But the reason I chose not to was one, you would need an entire film to talk about that one particular issue. And two, I don't want to create barriers for this being an evangelistic tool. And so I chose to include both young Earth and old Earth people. I don't address the topic of the age of the universe. I address the topic of the fact that the universe has a beginning and it seems to be finely tuned. And I believe that God created is more important than when he created. Since then, I have heard good arguments for the young Earth perspective, as well as good arguments for the old Earth perspective. I currently lean more towards the old Earth, but I'm open to the arguments for young Earth. And who knows, maybe that's what my next film will be.
So, for Christians who feel intellectually intimidated when talking to atheist friends, what's the one argument or piece of evidence from the film that you think is the easiest conversation starter with zero science background required?
Hmm. You know, I don't think you need a scientific background for virtually most of these arguments. I think you can understand these arguments in such a way that you can explain them to others. I teach these arguments to my 8-year-old son, and he's able to understand and grasp it. I think it's all the way that we memorize it, all the way that we explain it. If the universe had a beginning, it must have a cause. Okay, you don't need a scientific background to understand that concept. Everything that has a beginning has a cause for that beginning. The universe has things about it that seem to be finely tuned, that seemed it's almost as if the universe knew we were coming, right? These are concepts that you can understand, you can explain to someone. Even if you don't have the ability to memorize the scientific aspects of it, what you can do is you can refer people to books, or you could spend a little bit of time doing some research and try to understand some of those fine tunings, the distance of the Earth from the sun, the type of star we have, the location within our solar system. I don't think you need a scientific background to understand the moral argument. The fact that a lot of people who don't believe in God do it on the basis of the evil and suffering that they see in the world. Well, it turns out if there is no God, there is no evil and suffering in the world because there is no objective morality. There's no standard to measure those things by. And so for someone to have a complaint of evil means that there is something evil. And if there is something evil, there is a God because there must be something that is good. There must be a foundation or an objective basis by which we measure what is evil. And so I think these are concepts that we can all understand if we'll take the time to sit down and try to understand them. But even if you go into a conversation and you don't know the answers to any of those questions, you can still have a conversation and you can still make progress just by using questions to ask the other person about what they believe, ask them the reasons they believe it, ask them how they came to those conclusions, and try to understand their worldview. And if you don't know the answer to an objection, that's okay. All you have to say is, you know what, you've made a good point, and I don't know how to answer that, but I'll go find out and I'll get back to you. And that's when you go do a little bit of research, find a response to it, and I guarantee if you're not able to get back with them immediately, I guarantee the next time someone brings up that particular objection, you'll be able to respond to it. And I think there's only a handful of objections that non believers have. And if we can respond to those handful of objections, you're going to be in a lot better position than most Christians out there.
So let's talk pushback. New atheism is quieter now than it was 15 years ago, but there are still some very vocal critics online. What's the hardest criticism you've already received about the film, and how do you respond to it?
Hmm. You know, I think that I've had quite a bit of people that were not believers. I think one of the criticisms I had was that the film became too preachy towards the end. Because what I do is I structure the film in such a way that I lay out the evidence, but towards the end of the film, I deliver the gospel message. I explain the fact that we're all broken and separated from this creator, but the Creator has provided a path to Himself, and He's standing right in front of you. And all you have to do is receive Jesus, give your life to Jesus, take His hand, so to speak, and lean into Him. And my response to that would be, I created this film and structured it in such a way that the evidence, I think, speaks for itself. And the reality is, if the evidence really does line up and Christianity really is true, well, Christianity does make some claims about reality and it does make some claims about you. Jesus specifically makes some claims about you. And if these things are true, then these other things follow. That what Jesus says about reality is accurate as well. And unfortunately, it can be an uncomfortable position to be in. I know it is because I was there. I remember that moment when I was confronted with the fact that this all is actually true. And one of the things that held me back from giving my life to Jesus was the fact that I didn't want it to be true. Because if it's true, well, that means I don't have control of my life. I don't have control of what outcome comes from this reality. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling. But if it's true, it's true. And that's kind of what you're left with. You're left with, on the basis of evidence, does this best explain what we see within our universe and within our reality? And if it is, and what Jesus says about himself and what happened 2,000 years ago, if he resurrected from the dead, if that event actually happened, well, then Christianity is true. And as uncomfortable and as that may make you, it's the reality. And it's either true or it's not.
So you're releasing this right before Christmas 2025. If a church small group or a college ministry wants to use Universe Designed as an outreach tool in early 2026, what practical advice would you give them to maximize this evangelistic impact?
I would recommend, so I'm going to have, obviously, the film is going to be available for streaming on like Amazon, Apple TV, all those major streaming sites. But I will also, I haven't set it up yet, but I'm going to set up an option on our website to where you can have a church licensing fee. And so you could basically license the film for a year to be able to use in your church or in your ministry. And that way you can invite people into the room who maybe are non-believers and do like a movie screening and invite your non-believing friends or non-believing family members and get everybody into maybe a church or a theater and screen the movie. And then that would give you the opportunity for a conversation starter after people have watched the film. So for churches and those types of screenings, we will have that option. But this is also just a film that you could rent and invite your non-believing friends and family to come watch alongside with you, or you can just challenge someone to watch it by sharing it with them. People may not read through a book if you recommend a book, but maybe they'll watch a film, maybe they'll watch a movie. You could rent or purchase it for them and send it to them. I'll have DVDs and Blu-rays available as well shortly after the release, so you could use it as a Christmas gift or just a something that you could hand out to people for them to invite them to watch. So I think there are a number of ways that you could utilize a film like this just to start conversations and to really try to pique people's curiosity, and then direct them to the resources that are out there.
And finally, 5 or 10 years from now, when someone asks you, was Universe Designed worth pouring your life into? How will you know it was a success beyond box office or streaming numbers?
If this film changes the heart of one person and Jesus uses this film to bring them to himself, then it'll be worth it. I think that's all it takes is if it changes the life of one person, then everything we've done with this film will be absolutely worth it.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. I encourage people to check out Universe Designed. Great documentary. I personally had the chance to watch it. It's amazing. You'll learn a lot. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.